Welcome to GOODER Stories, where strategy meets heart. I'm Gail Hataitham, founder of GOODER Creative Studio, where we help nonprofits and purpose-driven brands turn their values into visuals and their stories into action. Every other week, I sit down with change makers from across Canada's nonprofit world to explore how marketing can move missions forward. This podcast is here to help you share your story with more clarity, creativity, and confidence. Today, I'm joined by Ella Higgins. Ella works for an environmental nonprofit as an organizing manager where she advocates for climate policy at the provincial level. With a degree in linguistics, she began her journey as a volunteer coordinator and has since grown into a leadership role. She's passionate and outspoken about sustainable solutions and social justice. Outside of her work, she moonlights in the band Hip Hip Thursday, bringing creativity and energy to everything she does. Ella, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Gail. I'm really excited to be here.
So, I'd love to start with your journey. You have a linguistics degree and you're working in environmental advocacy. So, how has your background shaped the way that you approach environmental communication?
Thanks for this opportunity to kind of like reflect on it all. That's a really good question. I really just have to say that it's been a roundabout way through a lot of this stuff. And that is exactly the metaphor that I used when I was starting a linguistics degree, is I sort of told people in my life, like, linguistics touches on a lot of things that I'm interested in, but I don't really know what my career is yet, what my thing is yet. And linguistics could be teaching English as a foreign language. It could be teaching students, like teaching sort of high school or grade school. It's marketing and communications. It's academia and it's science. And it's like all of these things blended together. So kind of the best answer to that is I got into linguistics purely on interest because I was like curious about the subject. And it was actually while I was in university that I think tipped the scale for me, questioning my path and if I wanted to be 100% all into music or in audio or something to do with that, or if I wanted to get kind of more into advocacy and politics in the working world as someone in communication. So linguistics, I guess, is just a part of the path that ultimately has led me to be a nonprofit worker with no environmental background. I think that's the thing that I always emphasize to people is I'm like, I didn't take a environmental science degree. I didn't take a biology degree. I'm fascinated by people who I kind of find myself working around who did that type of work. But yeah, it was kind of, I guess, more like a communications path ultimately that led me to the nonprofit world. So yeah.
So, what first pulled you toward the climate work? And like, what keeps you motivated, when the challenges feel so hard and so big?
Yeah. So what pulled me into this work, I mean, it's a few different points in the sense that I was born in Midwest Canada, Southwest Calgary to be more specific, and have people all in my lineage in my life, in my family who have worked in oil and gas because that's just what you do when you're from Alberta. A lot of families either have some connection to agriculture or some connection to oil and gas, and especially being in Calgary, like my family lineage comes from the east coast of Canada and Greece and Europe to people who were seeking money, were seeking jobs. And that's kind of how my family ended up in Midwest Canada. And I ultimately kind of grew up aware of these two really opposed things. One was the climate crisis, and the other was oil and gas being what we kind of, the whole modern world uses to do everything from cook with plastic devices and utensils and packaging all the way through to what we put in our cars. And then it was in university, I was aware of this. I was always kind of in high school, progressively, I became more of a bit, I guess a bit now looking back on it, like a rebel kid when I realized that the things that I was trying really hard to achieve were maybe if that pathway was to lead towards oil and gas, I realized I didn't really want to do that anymore. I didn't really want to work in oil and gas, which led me to take time working abroad, studying abroad. And it was when I was in university in Manchester that I was a little bit in closer proximity to a couple different things. One being the history of like the labor movement in Manchester and in the north of the UK, and learning about the history of unions and women's rights and workers' rights. And the other was then in that exact time frame, 2016 to 2019, is when Extinction Rebellion started doing a lot more protests, both in London and in Manchester. They're really controversial as well. And that was my first introduction to like, wow, like I guess people trying to draw attention to the issue is I think what you about Extinction Rebellion, whether you agree with some of what the organizers of Extinction Rebellion were doing in the UK or not, they were ultimately, I think, trying to draw attention to this very serious problem that they felt that nobody's paying attention to. So that time frame, I was in the UK on a student visa. I couldn't really get as involved with organizing as I guess I wanted to at that time. So then when I eventually I was back in Canada for COVID, just happened to be back waiting for my next visa when that hit. And then when I moved back to Canada in 2022, I guess that time frame ultimately influenced my decision to I want to do like I don't just want to go to protests. I don't just want to be like I don't want that to be my only involvement. I would really like to work for an environmental nonprofit in some sort of campaign work, and that's kind of what led me to the work in 2022.
That's awesome. Yeah, kind of like you found that part of yourself that you feel strongly that this is kind of a part of your what's it called? Like it's just meant to be, right? So climate policy can be like really dense and full of jargon. How do you translate those complex issues into something that feels more clear and actionable, especially like for volunteers or the public?
Yes, that is most of my work. It's a really tricky thing to do. I end up in a lot of conversations about, first identifying when we can what policy is coming down the line, coming on the path towards us, who are the kind of, in my case, we have to think about like people who are in power, whether that's institutional power, like CEOs of oil and gas companies, or you're thinking about political power, like leaders of political parties, having to figure out like who holds that power? How do we put pressure on them through having like their own constituents or stakeholders, like employees, speak up about it? And what's tricky about that is knowing what's coming and knowing how to distill it into a simple message. So, um, in short, to answer that question, I guess I would say that um, once I'm with people and we've talked about the issue, we've identified the issue, who's in charge, what's at stake, what the policy is called, trying to make that fun and engaging is a big part of the job. Learning how to turn that issue into really easy to remember identifier is kind of part of my background in linguistics, I guess, ties me towards that too, right? Of just like what comes to people's mind, what do you want to come to people's minds when they hear a certain thing? So, for instance, right now we have two really big issues in the province that are, I would say, coming down the pipe as the legislature is about to resume in late October, early November. And these are two policies. One is called the Coal Industry Modernization Initiative, and the other is called the Mature Asset Strategy. And both of these are policies that are kind of on paper trying to replace the moratorium on coal and the Orphan Well Fund and the Orphan Well savings that have been in place in the province that royalties and companies have paid into to secure like the eventual cleanup of oil and gas assets. And what people don't know about these kind of seemingly sounding trying to help the world names like mature asset strategy, we're trying to take care of this, and coal industry modernization initiative, we're trying to modernize this. Both of these are really heavily greenwashed policies that are not doing what they say on the tin. In the case of the mature asset strategy, it's making taxpayers pay for the cleanup of all of this abandoned infrastructure. With the coal industry modernization initiative, if anything is exempt as a special project, quote unquote, special project, it means that it kind of gives companies the pass to do whatever they want. So both of these are these really scary bills, these policies that are coming into legislature, and we had to figure out how do we get people to remember these names. So I know that for the polluter pays work, for the mature asset strategy, the slogan has become clean up your mass, because MAS stands for mass. So clean up your mass is a nice, easy way to get people to remember that. And the coal industry modernization initiative, when I've been speaking to people, I just keep saying CIMI, coal industry modernization initiative, just like those four letters, CIMI. I really try to repeat that over and over in people's minds, that when they see it in an article or hear about it on the news, they know the name CIMI, they can associate it with like, this is this thing that I was spoken to about on the door or in some sort of messaging. So I think that the tricky part there is like getting people to recognize things that are otherwise kind of hard to remember.
Really complex to explain and to understand for a lot of people understand that. And so like I think you have a lot of experience like training volunteers and crafting messaging for them to take into the community, right? How do you ensure that the core information stays consistent while still allowing them to communicate authentically?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question because, you know, all of this information is in the nonprofit world, in the advocacy world, is nobody's information to contain. I think what we're always focusing on is how do we free this information? How do we give people the right information when there's wrong information out there or conflicting information out there or too much information out there? How do you provide clarity to that? And so the biggest thing with any type of organizers, grassroots organizers, or the volunteers that I train, is kind of trying to make that message feel contained and focusing on what you can control. And I think that's been a large theme that I'm learning in my like activist journey is just accepting what we can control, accepting what we can do and not being too focused on the outcome. Certainly not having it in our minds that like this one evening of door knocking is going to take down this policy or change this person's mind who's in power. Like we have to be realistic about our goals and be proud of ourselves for accomplishing 20 doors, 100 doors of people that we've spoken to or made aware about some issue. So it's tricky sometimes to make the message feel contained, to make the experience feel contained. But I think when you do, you're letting people relax a bit, and that helps people find all of the things in organizing that are really fun and like the reasons why we do it, which is meeting like-minded people who are like volunteering with us, for making new connections out in the community or with each other, for brainstorming better ways of getting this message out, for experimenting in all the diverse people that we're having conversations with. Yeah, I think it has to feel contained for creativity to happen.
It sounds like you allow like the volunteers to really be involved in the process as well, right? Not just kind of remember the script and just go out.
For sure. I think it's that balance of like, we always try to make sure that what's put in a volunteer's hands is the kind of backstop safety net that they will need if they're caught in an unsure place at someone's door. Having things like sort of addendums and footnotes and more information. Our scripts, I think that maybe the trickiest thing for people when they first join is just kind of navigating the script. It's like a piece of music. It sometimes jumps to page 5 and then back to page 1 and then over to page 7 and then back to page 3. And like, it can sometimes be the one tricky thing, but all of that is built in a way to just make sure that like, if someone asks a more complex question, there's something to say to that while also really encouraging volunteers to be authentic with their own experience. And what I say to everybody in my peers, like people that I've just met, people that I'm training, is stories mean more than facts in this case. Like talking about your own reasons for why did you take the time to come out and canvass on something like coal that's happening in Alberta? Why did you take the time to come out to canvass on abandoned infrastructure and what it might do to our taxes? Like, why is that important to you? And then you start to hear stories of, well, I'm really concerned about healthcare and I'm really worried about the future of that if we don't have money for it. I'm really concerned about the quality of education. And that's something that we can all relate to and all connect to. Making the connections for people about why a better habitable place to live is also going to take the pressure off of the systems that we need is a different way to talk about climate solutions, I think, because it's drawing off of like our shared experiences.
Exactly. Personal story is so powerful and it's really connecting people together.
Yeah, connecting for sure. Yeah, I think like it really that is I think when people do the kind of outward facing communications work for a while, you realize it's like it's all of the same things that anybody else in any other industry is doing in marketing. Like we're trying to understand the person that's in front of you and make a connection with them in order for them to listen to you. If you want to get your pitch across, in our case that pitch is here's who exactly you can write a letter to or call that might really help us get some progress on this issue that you've expressed that you agree to me with, is like forming that connection first, where we talk about the ages of our kids or my nieces and nephews, or talk about grocery prices, or talk about anything that's going to connect us before heading into, in my case, what I'm sort of asking them to do to get involved with their democracy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Personal connection and common threads.
Yeah, common threads.
Yeah, that's very impactful. So in your experience, what are the biggest communication barriers to getting people engaged with climate issues? Is it like complexity or sense of urgency, or is it something else?
Yeah, I have thought about this a lot, and I have maybe what's the most like unsatisfying answer, but what I think is the most truthful answer, which is that people's biggest barrier is fear. And it just takes a moment of pause to like again reflect on like what are the things that we're anxious about in our life. And I think for a majority of us, first and foremost, when we're trying to meet sort of our short-term needs with our family, like we're thinking about our finances, we're thinking about the way that our own family budget is balanced. Beyond that, we might be thinking about our plans for the future. So we might be thinking about like us or our children's ability to have a home, have a secure place to live for their whole life. And it's kind of like it kind of goes out from that. I think what people used sometimes think of as like the hierarchy of needs, but is also very interwoven with community. I recently learned that I think his first name is Abraham or Abraham Maslow, but like the actual like Maslow of Maslow's hierarchy of needs did studies on like the Dene and Tsuut'ina Nation and like Blackfoot nations to understand how community relates to like those hierarchy of needs. If you just Google that, I promise that is a more sort of articulate, you'll find better information than I just cited. It's brand new information to me, so not very good citation on my part, but this actually did happen where he was trying to kind of test his own theories on different people's ways of living and different cultures, and I think got to see that, the huge piece of that triangle that seems a little like off kilter is our connection to others. It's kind of all focused on like us achieving our own, seeing our own vision take place, like seeing our own, I guess, enlightenment or fulfillment, like personal fulfillment in life. But what's not really recognized in that hierarchy of needs is like how interwoven all of these systems are. And the climate crisis for sure, the pandemic for another are things that have really like made us see what all those interwoven threads are when it comes to like supply chain and our communities, and we realize like just how not independent we are, how much we do have to rely on each other a lot. I think maybe in like Western culture, there's certainly like a discomfort with that, thinking about the climate crisis and like what is this going to mean for what we have in our future. So I'm taking this as a very dark place to illustrate like there's so much fear here, and it doesn't matter, what side of things politically you're on, like everybody's feeling that fear. Like that's not just I mean, I know that there's sources of information that will, I think, blame that fear on different things, but we're all feeling that. We're all thinking about the future. We're all scared about what that's going to look like. So again, I think the way through communication for people, it's kind of like, you know, expressing to people that it's like threading a needle. It's like you do have to go all the way to that place of connection with somebody before you can tell your story in and really get them to not just tell your story, but get them to see your side of things, get each other's perspective on these same issues. And yeah, like it's again, I think the most unsatisfying answer to say that I think it's like understanding and overcoming fear, but that is, actually with patience, one of the things that we can achieve by just like remaining in a place that we can communicate with each other and continuing to, try to keep free information out there in any type of public sphere, whether that's like media or you're putting up a poster or you're knocking on someone's door, any type of public sphere that has the right information, we're heading to a good place.
Yeah, fear is huge, and people respond to fear in totally different ways, right? Yeah, that could be a huge barrier. So, like, to your point, like, how do you balance, scientific facts with like the emotional part of it? Like, how do you communicate the issue, try to balancing those things? What is the line?
Yeah, also something I've thought a lot about. And to this, I would say that like the question that comes up with this question is what audience are you talking to? Because it really, I think, is audience specific. And what I mean by that is like you've just heard me say, emotion is everything, story is everything, connecting to people is everything. And that's true. So I would always lean on the side of that for trying to figure out ways to connect with people is like trying to kind of ground people in like real lived experiences when you're trying to put some sort of message out there that's talking about the environment or why this is an important thing to do to work on the environment. But when I say it kind of depends on the audience, it also depends on, is the person you're speaking to going to be a conduit of information for your next step? Like, are they someone who will help you kind of leapfrog your message forward? So in the instance of you're trying to put public pressure on a CEO or an MLA or anybody in like political power, a lot of the time you might want to be asking people to send a letter or you're asking people to make a phone call. So it's that person, your star. We sometimes sort of like refer to people as that language because it really is phenomenal when you can speak to somebody and then get them to be the hero to like take the phone call or send the email, take the action on your behalf, or kind of you've empowered them to do it on their own behalf. If I'm trying to get that person to connect to those sources of power, I might want to be giving them an example script or an example letter or an example, like, here are the kind of hard facts on a page. But I will also at the same time be encouraging them to, hey, but you mentioned that you were a teacher to me and that story was really impactful. So maybe in your message, you might want to write a couple more sentences about that experience. Like I'll encourage people in how they can personalize and bring the two things together, because ultimately we just need to empower people to make their own choice, to do what they want to with an action. What's in the realm of like, from my learnings, from my trainings and my advice is always that thing of like personalized things, because people can't help but, remember emotions when these things might come back up. And in the case of sometimes powerful MLAs or CEOs, your best bet is going to be to weigh on their conscience. And like, that's a thing that we're doing politically, but it's like, we can't, I don't mind that because they put themselves in that position to be my representative. This is, marginal and fractional to all of the other work that they have to do. And so just being something that can stick with people emotionally, that they know that like they're dealing with a group of people who are organized opposed to this issue, or they keep getting personalized voicemails. Like, I think, that's the goal that I'm trying to empower person A to do. Drawing the line, I guess, is all about like connecting to that person that I want to take an action, if that's the intention. And if it's just me wanting to like change the mind of a person or have them think a little bit differently, I'm not going to hit somebody with a whole bunch of facts. I'm going to like talk about, why did I arrive in this space and what's my path been? And I think what's interesting for people is when I say like, I come from this really privileged oil and gas Southwest Calgary background and I'm freaked out about it. So people that have no choice, whose lives are overwhelmed, like, I just feel this huge sense of obligation to be fixing the things that have come before me and wading through pages and pages of documents and policy to try to make it easy for the everyday person to understand an issue and know what ways they can take impact.
So like you were talking about leaders. So like for nonprofit leaders who listening right now and might be struggling with communication, what would be one practical advice that they could try tomorrow
Yeah.
to make their messaging more effective?
Yeah. Well, I will kind of get on my high horse and say what I think personally is the most effective ways of communicating these critical things. And with full confidence, I will say that part of that is just like experimenting, because the other thing is accepting that like all of us are constantly reshaping our communications and strategy to adapt to the world and how people are feeling. I think I take a lot from an interest in software development and coding. And a big thing that's hammered into the culture of that is that like everything is its own module. And if you're going to make an upgrade to a module, you need to make sure that you've tested to make sure that when you add it to the rest of the system, it's not going to break the rest of the system or make the rest of the thing fall apart. You have to be kind of delicate with versioning different pieces of code and software to make sure that it's compatible with everything else. So I feel like with how I've been describing like how ways in which I think about audiences and communication, it really is about breaking things up into as specific pieces as you can, or maybe specific isn't always the right word, but just the most kind of relevant audience distinctions that you can. So like I sort of said, like somebody who is an immediate kind of supporter when I start talking to them is going to receive a different set of messaging than somebody who's never heard about this issue before. And that person that I described who's already passionate about the issue, my goal with them is going to look different. My goal with them is going to be, hey, use your voice. Like, hey, did you know that you have this power to affect change on this issue? Very different to the person who's just heard about it. My intention is, although there are miracle cases where that person then at the end of the conversation feels inspired to make a call to their MLA, most of the time it's going to be just about like, hey, can I just plant a seed of information with you? Can I just share a couple things here at the door and maybe give you some places that you could do some further reading if that interests you? And by the way, here's our website if you do find one day that you want to come back and sign this petition. But breaking audiences down into like different sections and pieces and then allowing yourself to experiment are the two things that I think interplay a lot with each other. So once you've broken audiences down into those different pieces, it allows you to do more A/B testing of different, subject lines and ways of speaking to people. It just allows for more kind of testing to take place to understand, is this way too much to ask of this person who just joined our mailing list? Do they need to like hear a little bit more information before they feel empowered to take an action? Or maybe you're finding that people are sort of leapfrogging through these steps and you're like, oh, I can actually just ask somebody to come out to an event kind of right away in the first email because people are reacting to that. So breaking things apart, I think, is always a good first step.
Thank you. That's really solid advice. So you working in environmental advocacy by day and performing with your band Hip Hip Thursday by night. So how do those two worlds influence each other? How does your experience as a musician influence your thinking and about messaging and audience engagement in your work?
Well, firstly, I say with no shame, I'm proud to say that like I'm a clown. I think that's really what people should know about me is underneath any sort of pretense of trying to be a professional person in the professional world. I'm also a very silly person. And I think that influences both like how much fun I have with this band that I've been with for, I guess, a year and a half, maybe at this point of recording, and my approach to the work that I do, which is like, you can't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to like let yourself loose a little bit, and that will only bring good things in my experience. I think like any type of experience where I am intentionally putting myself through a little bit of an ego death at work, whether that's doing something silly and outlandish at a gig or just being the person in the room who's like not afraid to try reading the script for the first time out loud. And I might stumble over it, or we might realize that the script needs a lot of work, but like just not being afraid to try things um, and I, through growing up, I wasn't always that comfortable with making small talk with people, with being on a stage, certainly not. There's a lot of things that made me like really socially anxious as a kid and as a teen, but I've worked through it. Like I've done so much stuff to push past it that I feel like it's kind of my superpower now, where I can like tell people, it really doesn't matter if you are the first person to read the script and it's not very good. It really is not a big deal. Like it's more of a big deal emotionally and in our anxious minds than it is to anybody else in the room. And um, can't be afraid to try stuff, and we can't be afraid to fail. And I think like that to me has been taught a lot from participating in creativity, not just thinking about creativity, not just reading books about creativity, but you have to participate in a creative act, whether that's making music or being on a stage or putting your work out into the world in some form. Like it's all, the rubber hits the road when people see what you've put out into the world. And that's why marketing and the creative world like overlap so much. Communications in the creative world overlap so much because you can't be afraid to fail, because that's an inevitable case. That's an inevitable circumstance of trying to do anything in business or nonprofit or the world.
Thank you. I love that. I really love that. So if you had unlimited resources to decide a perfect public engagement campaign around climate policy, what would that look like?
Oof, really tricky question. I've been a little bit more engaged because we're coming up to like a municipal election in my ward and like municipal politics, and a lot of my work focus is around stuff that happens in the province. But thinking about what our cities can do, my brain's been there a lot lately, and it's made me think a lot about like the steps that we can take on a local level, like with your counselor, with your mayor, about just changes we can make ourselves. So I think like what overall the focus would be if I had that power would be like being a lot more proactive with the climate adaptation things that we need. So food security and having spaces that are cool for people, like where we can actually like, cool off when you're so that when you're going out for a walk and doing your shopping and, you know, or going to work or whatever, or wanting to take your kids out for a day, there's like a local water fountain so that you don't overheat, that there are places to refill a water bottle that are like for free around the city. So things like that that are like really actionable resources to help everybody. Cause to me, that's also like you're not only supporting people that are unhoused, you're supporting people like all throughout a city across, you know, whatever level of privilege, whatever your circumstance is. So when I think about like what we need to do at large, public engagement is really intrinsic to that. Like we need to both get a message out and we need to help people kind of at the same time. So thinking about things that people can see in their community that are helping make the world a better place are a really good place to start with that. So local gardens, local spaces to cool off, bring back like more public swimming pools, like places that you can actually take your family and cool off in extreme heat is one start. There's a lot of different ideas that I have, but I think that that would be like where I'd try to like bring people's focus first because I think that's what's had the most impact on me in different cities.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Ella, for such a fun and inspiring conversation. And thanks to all of you for listening to GOODER Stories. If you like today's episode, please subscribe and share it with your friend who cares about making a difference. And that's a wrap on another GOODER story. Until next time, keep making stories worth sharing.
Thank you.